Captain Laura Daniels had always been different at Bagram Air Base. While other pilots grabbed coffee and complained about the heat, she was already in the hangar at dawn, running her hands along the titanium armor of her A-10 Thunderbolt. The Warthog wasn't pretty. It looked like someone had welded wings to a bathtub, but to Laura, it was perfect. Her squadron mates called her Iron Hawk for good reason. In 3 years of combat missions, she had never lost a ground team under her protection, never failed to answer a call for help, never backed down from impossible odds. The brass loved her statistics, the ground troops worshipped her, and the media had started calling her the Angel of Afghanistan. But success bred resentment, especially from Colonel Marcus Brennan. Brennan was old-school Air Force, the kind of officer who believed fighters belonged in the sky playing Top Gun, not wallowing in the dirt supporting ground pounders. He'd been passed over for promotion twice, and watching a female pilot half his age collect medals and commendations while flying what he called the ugliest plane in the inventory ate at him like acid. "Daniels," he called out as Laura finished. Her pre-flight inspection one Tuesday morning. His voice carried across the tarmac with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "My office, now." Laura wiped her hands on a rag and jogged over, still wearing her flight suit. Brennan's temporary office was a converted shipping container, stuffy and cramped, with photos of F-16s covering every wall. Not a single A-10 in sight. "Sir?" Laura stood at attention, though something in Brennan's expression made her stomach tighten. "I've been reviewing your mission reports," Brennan said, settling behind his metal desk like a judge preparing to pass. Sentence: "Your recent enthusiasm for close air support missions is concerning." Laura blinked. "Sir, I don't understand." "My success rate. Your recklessness is what concerns me," Brennan interrupted, his pale eyes cold. "Flying below minimum altitude, engaging targets within danger-close parameters without proper authorization, and frankly, showboating for the cameras." The accusation hit Laura like a slap. "Colonel, every mission I've flown has been by the book. I've saved. You've been lucky," Brennan cut her off again. "And luck runs out. I'm implementing new protocols for close air support missions, effective immediately." He slid a folder across the desk. Laura opened it, her heart sinking as she read. New minimum altitude requirements. Mandatory approval from ground commanders. Before engaging. Extended clearance procedures that would add precious minutes to response times. "Sir, these protocols will get people killed," Laura said, trying to keep her voice steady. "When troops are in contact, seconds matter. What gets people killed is cowboy pilots who think they're invincible," Brennan snapped. "You will follow these protocols, Captain, or you'll find yourself flying a desk in Kansas. Are we clear?" Laura felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd seen Brennan's type before, officers who cared more about covering their careers than protecting the troops. But she'd never had to work under one. "Crystal clear, sir," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Good? And Daniels?" Brennan's smile was thin and cruel. "Your next mission briefing is in an hour. I'll be personally overseeing your compliance." As Laura walked back to the hangar, she felt the weight of every ground trooper who might die because help arrived 30 seconds. Too late. The new protocols weren't about safety, they were about control. About putting the uppity female pilot in her place. Master Sergeant Jake Rodriguez, her crew chief, took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "Mad news from the colonel?" "The worst kind," Laura muttered, handing him the folder. "Read it and weep." Rodriguez scanned the pages, his weathered face growing darker with each paragraph. He'd been working at TENS for 15 years, had seen too many good pilots grounded by politics and ego. "This is garbage, Captain," he said finally. "These altitude requirements alone will make precision strikes impossible. Tell that to Brennan, Lavra replied, staring at her warthog. The aircraft seemed to sense her mood, its shark-painted nose looking somehow less fierce in the harsh Afghan sunlight. But as she stood there, Lavra made a silent promise. Brennan might have the rank, but she had something more important. The absolute certainty that when American troops called for help, someone had to answer, no matter what the cost. The radio in the hangar crackled to life. Any station. This is Iron Dagger 1. We are in heavy contact and need immediate air support. Laura's hand moved instinctively toward her helmet, but Rodriguez caught her arm. Captain, you heard the colonel's orders. She looked at the radio, then at the folder of protocols, then at the photos on the wall pictures of her with grateful. Ground troops, men whose lives she'd saved with split-second decisions and fearless flying. Something hardened in Laura's green eyes. Brennan wanted to play games with soldiers' lives? Fine, but he'd picked the wrong pilot to mess with. The war for Laura's soul was about to begin. The first mission under Brennan's new protocols was a disaster waiting to happen. Laura sat in the briefing room, her jaw clenched as she listened to the overly complicated chain of command Brennan had established. What used to be a simple radio call from troops in contact now required approval from 3 different levels of command: weather verification, collateral damage assessment, and a formal targeting brief. Questions? Brennan asked, his pale eyes scanning the room like a predator looking for weakness. Lieutenant Tom Walsh, Laura's wingman, raised his hand tentatively. Sir, what if the ground troops are in immediate danger? These protocols could add 10 to 15 minutes. Then they'll have to hold their position, Brennan replied coldly. Better to have living troops who waited for proper air support than dead ones who got sloppy close air support. Lavra felt her hands ball into fists under the table. Around her, other pilots shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in the room knew Brennan's logic was backwards, but nobody wanted to challenge a colonel. After the briefing, Walsh cornered Laura outside the tent. This is insane, he whispered. We both know those protocols will get people killed. Keep your voice down, Lavra warned, glancing around. But she could see the same frustration in his eyes that burned in her chest. Their first test came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Lavra was airborne on patrol when the radio erupted with panicked voices. A convoy of Marines had hit an IED and was taking heavy fire from multiple positions. The vehicles were disabled, casualties were mounting, and the enemy was closing in for the kill. Iron Hawk, this is Devil Dog 6. The Marine commander's voice crackled through the static. We need immediate air support. Grid coordinates follow. Laura's training kicked in automatically. She could see the smoke rising from the valley below, could practically taste the desperation in the Marine's voice. Her targeting computer was already painting enemy positions, her thumb hovering over the trigger. Then Brennan's protocols flooded back into her mind. Devil Dog 6, stand by, Lavra replied, hating herself for the words. I need to request clearance for engagement. Negative, Iron Hawk. We need you now. Marines are dying down here. Lavra switched to the command frequency, her voice tight with controlled fury. Control, this is Iron Hawk requesting immediate clearance for close air support. Devil Dog 6 is in heavy contact. Iron Hawk control. You need to file proper targeting request through ground operations. Stand by for routing. Control, there's no time for routing. Marines are in contact now. Iron Hawk, you will follow established protocols. Colonel's orders. Lavra circled overhead, watching through her targeting pod as muzzle flashes closed in on the disabled Marine vehicles. She could end this fight in 30 seconds with a single strafing run. Instead, she was forced to watch helplessly as bureaucracy played games with lives. By the time clearance finally came through 18 agonizing minutes later, the Marines had suffered 3 KIA and 7 wounded. Laura's strikes were devastating and precise, destroying the enemy positions in minutes. But she was 18 minutes too late. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the Marine commander's voice. "Marines are dying down here." She kept seeing the casualty report. 3 good men dead because she'd followed orders instead of her instincts. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found her in the hangar at 0300, sitting on a crate and staring at her at 10. "Heard about today," he said quietly, settling beside her. "Word's getting around the base. 3 Marines, Jake," Laura whispered. 3 kids who won't go home because I followed Brennan's damn protocols." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You know this isn't your fault, right? This is on Brennan. Tell that to their families," Laura replied bitterly. "I will, if it comes to that," Rodriguez said firmly. "And so will every Marine who made it out alive because you finally got clearance to save them." Laura looked at him, seeing something fierce in the old sergeant's eyes. "Jake, what if I told you I was thinking about doing something that could end my career?" Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled grimly. "I'd say it's about time, Captain. And I'd ask what you need me to do to help." The next morning brought new humiliation. Brennan had scheduled a training exercise, a mock close air support mission with him personally observing from the ground. Every pilot knew it was really a chance for him to micromanage. Laura in front of the entire squadron. As Laura taxied her at 10 to the runway, she noticed something different in how the ground crews looked at her. Word about the Marines had spread, and she could see the quiet anger in their faces. These were men who'd lost friends because politics had gotten in the way of doing their jobs. The training mission was a joke. Brennan had Laura flying figure eights at high altitude while he criticized every aspect of her approach over the radio. "Too fast, Daniels. Too low, Daniels. Not following proper engagement sequence, Daniels." Meanwhile, actual combat missions were being flown by other pilots who didn't have to deal with Brennan's personal attention. Laura could hear the radio chatter ground troops calling for help, her squadron mates responding immediately without the bureaucratic delays Brennan imposed on her. It was becoming clear that this wasn't about safety or procedures. This was personal. That evening, Lieutenant Walsh approached her with troubling news. "Laura, I overheard something you need to know. Brennan's been making calls back to the States. Word is, he's trying to get you transferred out of combat operations." Entirely, Laura felt her blood turn to ice. "On what grounds?" "Psychological evaluation. He's claiming your aggressive tactics indicate poor judgment and possible instability." The room spun around Laura. A psych eval could end her flying career permanently. Even if she was eventually cleared, the mark would follow her forever. "There's more," Walsh continued reluctantly. "He's been interviewing other pilots, asking leading questions about your risk-taking behavior and disregard for authority." Laura sank into a chair, the full scope of Brennan's campaign becoming clear. He wasn't just trying to control her missions, he was systematically destroying her career. And he was using the deaths of Marines as ammunition. But as she sat there, something cold and determined settled in Laura's chest. Brennan might have rank, but she had something more powerful. The absolute loyalty of every grunt who'd ever heard her at 10's roar when they needed it most. If Brennan wanted a war, she'd give him one. But it would be fought on her terms, with her rules. The hunt was about to begin. The breaking point came on a mission that should have been routine. Laura was flying cover for a SEAL extraction in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Intelligence reported light enemy activity, minimal threat level. The SEALs had successfully recovered a high-value informant and were moving to their pickup zone when everything went sideways. "Iron Hawk, this is Iron Dagger 1. Lieutenant Mason Reese's voice crackled through the radio, tight with control panic. We are in heavy contact. Repeat, heavy contact. Multiple enemy positions. We are pinned down and need immediate air support. Laura could see the chaos below through her targeting pod. The SEALs were trapped in a narrow valley, enemy muzzle flashes winking from the ridgelines on both sides. The extraction helicopters had been forced to abort their landing due to heavy fire. Iron Dagger 1, this is Iron Hawk, Laura replied, already banking toward the target area. I have eyes on your position. Danger close? Affirmative. Danger close. We are running low on ammo and have wounded. Request immediate gun runs on the eastern ridge. Laura's thumb moved to the weapon select switch, her targeting computer painting enemy positions. The shot was clear. The targets were marked, and American lives hung in the balance dot. Then Brennan's voice cut through the radio like a knife. Iron Hawk, this is Overlord. You are ordered to maintain holding pattern and await clearance before engaging. Do not, repeat, do not engage without authorization. Laura felt her world tilt. Overlord, Iron Dagger 1 is an immediate danger. I have clear shots on enemy positions. Iron Hawk, you will follow established protocols. Request targeting clearance through proper channels. On the ground, the SEAL situation was deteriorating rapidly. Iron Hawk, we need you now, Reyes shouted. Over gunfire. They're massing for an assault. We won't last 5 more minutes. Laura circled overhead, watching through her targeting pod as enemy fighters moved closer to the SEAL's position. Her computer showed perfect firing solutions. One strafing run would break up the attack and give the SEALs breathing room. Instead, she was forced to orbit helplessly while Brennan's bureaucracy ground through its procedures. Control, this is Iron Hawk requesting immediate clearance for close air support, she called repeatedly. Iron Hawk, stand by. Routing your request through ground operations for approval. Control, there's no time. Americans are dying down there. Iron Hawk, you will maintain holding pattern or face disciplinary action. Through her headset, Laura could hear the SEAL team's radio chatter growing more desperate. Ammunition reports getting lower. Casualty reports coming in. The sound of men who knew they were going to die. She thought about Brennan's threats, about her career, about the psych evaluation hanging over her head. Then she looked down at the tiny figures on her targeting display, real men with real families, who would never see home if she didn't act. The decision crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. Iron Dagger 1, this is Iron Hawk, she said, her voice steady as steel. Keep your heads down. I'm coming in hot. Iron Hawk, you are ordered to maintain. Brennan's voice began. Laura switched off the command frequency. Her attend dropped like a stone, diving toward the valley floor. The a U-8 Avenger cannon spun up with its distinctive whine, 7 barrels preparing to unleash hell. Laura's targeting reticle settled on the eastern ridge where muzzle flashes sparkled like deadly stars. Guns, 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 she called, squeezing the trigger. The cannon's roar shook the mountains. 30mm depleted uranium rounds tore through enemy positions, sending clouds of rock and debris skyward. The effect was immediate and devastating. Enemy fire from the eastern ridge ceased completely. Laura banked hard left, lining up on the western positions. Another burst from the GAU-8 silenced those guns as well. In less than 2 minutes, she had broken the enemy's coordinated assault and given the SEALs room to breathe. Iron Dagger 1, you're clear to move, she called. I'll provide cover to your extraction point. Iron Hawk, you just saved our lives, Reyes replied, his voice thick with gratitude. We owe you one. But even as Laura provided cover for the SEAL extraction, she knew her career was probably over. She had directly disobeyed orders from a superior officer in a combat zone. In military terms, that was career suicide. The radio crackled back to life as Brennan's voice returned, cold with fury. Ironhawk, you will return to base immediately for debriefing. Consider yourself grounded pending investigation. Lavra didn't respond. She stayed on station until the SEALs were safely aboard their extraction helicopters and heading home. Only then did she turn her attention toward BAGRM. As she flew through the Afghan twilight, Lavra felt a strange sense of peace. She had saved 6 American lives today. If that cost her everything else, so be it. But Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting. When she landed, and the look on his face told her everything she needed to know. "Colonel's on the warpath," he said quietly as Lavra shut down her engines. "He's called an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. Word is, he's pushing for court-martial." Lavra nodded, unsurprised. "Jake, I need you to know, I don't regret it. Those SEALs are alive because we did our job." Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Captain, there's something you should know. That SEAL team leader you saved, Lieutenant Reyes? He's been on the radio for the past hour, telling anyone who'll listen exactly what happened up there." "What do you mean?" "Word spreading through the entire base about how you saved those boys while Brennan played politics with their lives. The ground troops are talking, Captain, and they're angry." Lavra felt a flicker of hope. Maybe her career was over, but if her actions had opened people's eyes to what Brennan was doing, maybe some good would come of it. "There's more," Rodriguez continued. "I've been doing some digging into those new protocols of his. Found some interesting things in the regulations that I think you should know about." He handed her a folder thick with military regulations and procedures. "Turns out, there are rules about unnecessarily endangering troops for administrative purposes, and there are protections for pilots who violate orders to prevent loss of life." Lavra stared at the folder, her mind racing. "Jake, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to stop playing defense, Captain. Maybe it's time to go on the attack." That night, Lavra sat in her quarters, reading through military regulations she'd never had to study before. Slowly, a picture emerged of a legal framework designed to protect soldiers from exactly the kind of bureaucratic negligence Brennan was practicing. More importantly, she found precedent cases where officers had been held accountable for creating policies that unnecessarily endangered troops. By dawn, Lavra had a plan. It was risky, it would require careful documentation, and it would mean going to war with a superior officer. But if she played it right, she might not just save her own career. She might save the lives of every ground soldier who depended on close air support. Brennan wanted to destroy her for saving American lives. Fine, but Lara Daniels was about to teach him that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. The counterattack was about to begin. Lara knew she had exactly one shot at this. If she was going to take down a colonel, she needed more than just moral outrage. She needed documentation, witnesses, and an airtight case that even the most political general couldn't ignore. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 1000 hours, but Lara was awake before dawn, organizing her counterattack. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had become her unofficial intelligence officer, and what he discovered in the past 24 hours was damning. "Captain, you need to see this," Rodriguez said, sliding a manila folder across her desk. "I went through the maintenance logs for the past month. Look at column 4. Lara scanned the data, her eyes widening as the pattern became clear. Since Brennan's protocols had been implemented, average response time for close air support had increased from 4 minutes to over 18 minutes. More tellingly, mission abort rates had tripled due to procedural delays. "Jake, this is exactly what we need," she breathed. "Hard data showing his protocols are getting people killed." "Gets better," Rodriguez grinned. "I had a chat with some of the ground controllers. Turns out they've been keeping their own unofficial records, tracking how many calls for air support have been delayed or canceled due to the new procedures. He handed her another file. Inside were photocopied radio logs, handwritten notes, and most importantly, a letter signed by 12 different forward air controllers stating their concerns about the new protocols. They were planning to send this up the chain anyway, Rodriguez explained. Word about yesterday's mission just gave them the push they needed. Lavra felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. The entire close air support community was rallying behind her, and they had the documentation to prove Brennan's policies were deadly. But her most powerful ally came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Mason Reese, the SEAL team leader she'd saved, arrived at Bagram on the first transport from the field. He was still wearing his combat gear, his face streaked with dirt and dried sweat, and he was angrier than any special operations soldier Lavra had ever seen. "Captain Daniels," he said, finding her in the hangar. "I heard about the hearing. I'm here to testify." "Lieutenant, you don't have to—" "The hell I don't," Reyes interrupted. "6 of my men are alive because you had the guts to do your job when some paper-pushing colonel was playing politics with our lives. If they want to court-martial you for saving American soldiers, they'll have to go through me first." Behind Reyes stood Petty Officer Marcus Harland and the other members of his team who could walk. Each man had the same expression of quiet fury, the look of professional warriors who'd been betrayed by their own command structure. "Besides," Harland added with a cold smile, "we've got something Colonel Brennan probably doesn't know we have." He held up a small digital recorder. Every radio transmission from yesterday's mission, every delay, every denied request, every minute we spent getting shot at while waiting for permission to be saved. Lavra stared at the device, hardly daring to believe it. "You recorded everything?" "Standard procedure for after-action reports," Reyes explained. "But in this case, it's evidence of criminal negligence." The pieces of Laura's defense were falling into place, but she knew Brennan wouldn't go down without a fight. He had rank, political connections, and the institutional bias that always favored officers over enlisted personnel. Her suspicions were confirmed when Lieutenant Walsh approached her an hour before the hearing, his face pale with worry. "Lavra, I've been hearing rumors," he said quietly. "Brennan's been making calls all morning. Word is, he's got support from some higher-ups who think you're becoming too much of a media liability." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. You're the poster girl for close air support. If it comes out that the protocols are flawed, it makes the entire command structure look bad. Easier to sacrifice one pilot than admit systemic problems." Lavra felt her stomach drop. She'd been thinking tactically, but Brennan was playing politics at a level she'd never considered. "There's more," Walsh continued reluctantly. "He's bringing in a witness. Captain Derek Hammond from the 16th Fighter Squadron." Laura's blood turned to ice. Hammond was known throughout the Air Force as a glory hound, a pilot who'd do anything to advance his career. If Brennan had promised him something in exchange for testimony against her, what's Hammond going to say? That you've been reckless for months. That other pilots have expressed concerns about your dangerous flying. That yesterday was just the culmination of a pattern of poor judgment. The hearing room was a converted briefing tent, stuffy and dim despite the overhead lights. Lavra sat at a metal table facing a panel of 3 officers: Colonel Brennan, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes from Wing Legal, and Major General Robert Crawford, who'd flown down from Kabul specifically for this proceeding. Brennan was confident, almost smug, as he presented his case. He painted Laura as a reckless pilot whose disregard for proper procedures had finally resulted in direct insubordination. He had charts showing her frequent low-altitude flights, statistics on her ammunition expenditure, and testimony from Hammond that made her sound like a mentally unstable glory seeker. "Gentlemen, ladies," Brennan concluded, "Captain Daniels represents everything that's wrong with modern military aviation. Individual heroics over institutional discipline. Personal glory over professional responsibility. Yesterday's incident was not an isolated event. It was the predictable result of allowing cowboy tactics to go unchecked. It was a masterful performance, and Laura could see it having an effect on the panel. Even General Crawford, who had a reputation for supporting his pilots, looked troubled. Then it was Laura's turn. She stood slowly, her dress uniform immaculate, her posture perfect. When she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and absolutely certain. General Crawford, Colonel Hayes, I am guilty of exactly one thing: putting the lives of American servicemen above administrative convenience. She opened her first folder. These are the mission reports from the past month. Since Colonel Brennan's protocols were implemented, close air support response times have increased by an average of 14 minutes. Mission abort rates have tripled. And yesterday, 6 Navy SEALs nearly died because those protocols prevented me from doing my job. The radio recordings played next. Reyes' desperate calls for help. Brennan's cold orders to wait for clearance. The sound of gunfire getting closer as minutes ticked by. But Laura's masterstroke came when she called her final witness. I'd like to present testimony from Master Sergeant Jake Rodriguez, who has been analyzing the maintenance and operational impact of the new protocols. Rodriguez stepped forward, his dress uniform bearing the ribbons of 20 years of service. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who'd seen everything the Air Force had to offer. Sir, I've been working at TENS for 15 years. I've seen good pilots and bad pilots, good commanders and bad commanders. But I've never seen anything like what Colonel Brennan has done to this squadron. He presented his data methodically, clinically. Response times. Mission effectiveness. Most damning of all, the casualty reports from ground units that had been denied timely air support. Sir, these protocols aren't about safety or proper procedure, Rodriguez concluded. They're about one man's personal vendetta against a pilot, who makes him look bad, and they're getting people killed. The room was dead silent when he finished. Laura could see doubt creeping into the panel's faces. The first cracks in Brennan's case, but it was Lieutenant Reyes who delivered the killing blow. He stood at attention, his bearing perfect despite the bandage visible beneath his uniform sleeve. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd looked death in the face and lived to tell about it. General, 6 months ago, Captain Daniel saved my team from an ambush in Helmand Province. 4 months ago, she pulled a Marine squad out of a kill zone near Kandahar. Yesterday, she saved our lives again when her chain of command was willing to let us die for the sake of paperwork. Reyes looked directly at Brennan, his eyes hard as flint. Sir, I've been fighting this war for 8 years. I've worked with a lot of pilots, some good, some not so good. But I've never worked with anyone who cared more about bringing soldiers home alive than Captain Daniels. If the Air Force court-martials her for saving American lives, then this institution has lost its soul. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura could see the impact of Reyes' words on the panel, especially General Crawford, whose own son was serving with an army unit in Afghanistan. When Brennan tried to respond, his voice lacked its earlier confidence. General, we cannot allow individual pilots to decide which orders to follow. Colonel, General Crawford interrupted, his voice cutting through the tent like a blade. I think we've heard enough. Laura held her breath as the panel conferred. In whispers, everything she'd worked for, everything she believed in, hung in the balance. When Crawford finally spoke, his words would change everything. General Crawford's weathered face was unreadable as he studied the documents spread before him. The tent was silent except for the distant sound of aircraft engines and the whisper of air conditioning fighting against the Afghan heat. Colonel Brennan, Crawford said finally, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in uniform. "I have some questions about these protocols you implemented." Brennan straightened, confidence flickering back into his eyes. "Yes, sir. I'd be happy to clarify any. Were these protocols reviewed by Wing Safety before implementation?" "Sir, I believe my authority as squadron commander. That's a no." "Colonel." Crawford's tone was deadly quiet. "Were they reviewed by the Air Ground Operations School? By the Close Air Support Center of Excellence? By anyone with actual expertise in these matters?" "General, the situation required immediate action to prevent—" "Colonel, I'm not finished." Crawford picked up another document. "This is a report from the Joint Terminal Attack Controller School at Nellis. They classify your altitude requirements as operationally unsound and your clearance procedures as contrary to established doctrine. When did you plan to mention this?" Larver watched Brennan's face go pale. She hadn't known about the Nellis report. Apparently, Rodriguez's intelligence network was even better than she'd thought. Furthermore, Crawford continued, "I have here a letter from General Morrison at Central Command expressing grave concern about recent delays in close air support throughout your area of operations. He specifically mentions 3 incidents where ground forces suffered casualties due to what he calls unnecessary administrative delays." The general's eyes fixed on Brennan like a targeting laser. "Colonel, it appears your protocols have attracted attention at the highest levels of command." "The wrong kind of attention." Brennan tried to recover. "Sir, those incidents were unfortunate, but maintaining proper procedures cost American lives," Crawford finished. "Sergeant Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, what was the real purpose of these protocols?" Rodriguez stood, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir, based on my observations and discussions with squadron personnel, the protocols appeared designed to target one specific pilot rather than improve overall safety." "That's preposterous," Brennan exploded, his composure finally cracking. "I won't sit here and be accused of. You'll sit there and answer my questions." Crawford snapped, his voice carrying the steel that had made him one of the most respected generals in the Air Force. "Captain Daniels, do you have anything to add?" Larver stood, her heart pounding. This was her moment, the chance to present the evidence that would either vindicate her or destroy what was left of her career. "Sir, I do." She opened her final folder, the one she'd been saving for last. 3 weeks ago, I submitted a formal inquiry about these protocols through proper channels. I asked for clarification on several points that seemed to contradict established doctrine. She handed copies to the panel. This is Colonel Brennan's response. As you can see, he denied my request for review and threatened disciplinary action if I continued to question command decisions. Crawford scanned the document, his jaw tightening. "He threatened you for asking legitimate questions about operational procedures?" "Yes, sir. He also told me that if I didn't adjust my attitude, I'd find myself flying a desk in Kansas." "Jesus Christ," Crawford muttered, then caught himself. "Pardon the language." "Colonel, is this an accurate representation of your response to Captain Daniels' inquiry?" Brennan's face was flushed red. "General, Captain Daniels has been undermining my authority since the day I took command." Her inquiry was nothing more than an attempt to do her job. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes interrupted. It was the first time the wing legal officer had spoken, and her voice was sharp with professional outrage. "General, I've reviewed the regulations governing operational procedures. Captain Daniels not only had the right to question these protocols, she had the duty to do so if she believed they endangered personnel." Crawford nodded grimly. "And when she tried to do that duty through proper channels, she was threatened with punishment." He looked directly at Brennan. "Colonel, do you understand the position you've put this command in?" Before Brennan could answer, there was a commotion outside the tent. Voices, footsteps, the sound of someone arguing with the guards. "What the hell?" Crawford began, then stopped as Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at the tent flap. "Sir, sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see." Behind Rodriguez came a sight that made Laura's breath catch. A steady stream of airmen, soldiers, and Marines filing into the area outside the tent. Ground crews, forward air controllers, infantry officers, medics, all the people who depended on close air support to do their jobs and stay alive. "Sir," Rodriguez continued, "when word got out about this hearing, people started showing up. They want to speak on Captain Daniels' behalf." Through the tent flap, Laura could see more personnel arriving every minute. The crowd was growing, and their mood was unmistakable. These weren't just curious bystanders. These were professional warriors making a statement. Lieutenant Reyes stepped forward from the crowd. "General, permission to speak?" Crawford looked stunned by the show of support. "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "Sir, every man out there has worked with Captain Daniels. Every one of us owes our life to her or knows someone who does. We're not here to interfere with military justice. We're here to make sure the truth gets told." Behind Reyes, Petty Officer Harland held up a thick folder. "Sir, we've collected sworn statements from 47 different personnel who worked with Captain Daniels. Every single one tells the same story. She's the pilot you call when everything else has failed." Crawford accepted the folder, his expression growing more troubled as he flipped through the pages. Laura could see testimonials, mission reports, and photographs of soldiers posing with her at 10 after successful rescues. "This is highly irregular," Brennan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The sight of so many personnel willing to stake their reputations on Laura's behalf was clearly shaking him. "What's irregular?" Crawford replied coldly. "Is a squadron commander implementing policies that his own people consider dangerous and counterproductive." He closed the folder and looked directly at Brennan. "Colonel, I'm suspending these protocols, effective immediately pending a full investigation." Brennan's face went white. "Sir, you can't my authority as squadron commander. Your authority extends to lawful orders that don't endanger American personnel." Crawford cut him off. "These protocols fail that test." He turned to Laura. "Captain Daniels, you are hereby reinstated to full flight status. Your actions yesterday saved American lives, and anyone who says otherwise can answer to me personally." The crowd outside erupted in cheers that could be heard 3 hangars away. Laura felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she maintained her military bearing. But Crawford wasn't finished. "Colonel Brennan, you will report to my office in Kabul tomorrow morning. We're going to have a very long conversation about command responsibility and the proper treatment of subordinate officers." Brennan stood slowly, his career visibly crumbling around him. "General, I request." "You can request whatever you want, Colonel, from Kabul." Dismissed. As Brennan left the tent, his shoulders hunched in defeat, Laura felt a moment of something that wasn't quite satisfaction. The man had tried to destroy her career and endangered American lives in the process. But seeing any officer fall wasn't something to celebrate. That moment passed quickly when Lieutenant Reyes approached her with a grin that could have powered the entire base. "Captain, I don't know how to thank you," he said, extending his hand. "Thank me?" Laura laughed, accepting the handshake. "Lieutenant, you and your men are the ones who made this possible. Without your testimony, without your backbone, we'd all be dead." Reyes interrupted. "Ma'am, you took on a colonel to save 6 enlisted men you'd never met. That's not just good flying, that's good leadership." Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at her shoulder, wearing the biggest smile she'd ever seen on his weathered face. "Captain, there's something else you should know. General Crawford just approved your promotion to major. Seems like headquarters has been watching your career with great interest." Laura stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "A promotion? after nearly being court-martialed? There's more, Rodriguez continued, clearly enjoying himself. You're being transferred to the Close Air Support School at Nellis. They want you to help rewrite the training curriculum based on your combat experience. The implications hit Lavra like a freight train. Not only was her career saved, she was being given the chance to ensure that future pilots would be better prepared to support ground troops. It was more than vindication. It was validation of everything she'd fought for. But the best news came from an unexpected source. General Crawford approached her as the crowd began to disperse, his stern expression softening slightly. "Major Daniels," he said, using her new rank, "I have one more piece of information. The Pentagon has approved a new close air support doctrine based on your mission reports and recommendations. It emphasizes pilot initiative, rapid response, and support for ground commanders. It's being named the Daniels Protocol." Lara felt her knees go weak. Her name would be attached to doctrine that would guide close air support operations for years to come. Every pilot who flew in support of ground troops would be trained according to principles she had helped develop. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing," Crawford replied. "The troops need pilots like you, and the Air Force needs officers with the courage to stand up for what's right." As the general walked away, Lavra found herself surrounded by the men and women who had supported her through the darkest moment of her career. Ground crews, air controllers, infantry officers, special operations personnel, all the people who understood that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought in the sky, but in defense of the principles that made their sacrifices meaningful. "Master." Sergeant Rodriguez clapped her on the shoulder. "So, Major, ready to get back to work?" Lara looked at her attend sitting in the hangar, its shark mouth grinning in the harsh fluorescent light. Somewhere out there, American troops were counting on close air support to bring them home alive. And now, thanks to the courage of everyone who had stood with her, she could give them the support they deserved. "Rodriguez," she said, heading toward her aircraft, "prep the bird. We've got work to do." Behind her, the hangar filled with the sound of people getting back to the business of war. The good kind of war, where courage and principle mattered. More than politics and personal ambition. The battle for Laura's career was over. The war for American lives continued. The morning after the hearing, Lavra woke to find her world completely transformed. Word of Brennan's humiliation and her vindication had spread through the base like wildfire, and the reaction was everything she could have hoped for. She arrived at the hangar to find her attend surrounded by well-wishers. Ground crews who had been forced to watch good pilots grounded by bad politics, air controllers who had seen too many missions delayed by bureaucratic nonsense, and infantry officers who finally felt like someone in the Air Force understood their reality. Major Daniels called Chief Master Sergeant Williams, the base's senior enlisted advisor. "Heard about your promotion. Well deserved, ma'am." Lavra still wasn't used to the new rank. 24 hours ago, she'd been facing a court-martial. Now she was being congratulated by the most senior NCO on the base. But the real satisfaction came from watching Brennan's final humiliation unfold. The colonel had been scheduled to fly back to Kabul for his meeting with General Crawford. But before his transport arrived, something interesting happened. A steady stream of personnel began filing reports with the Inspector General's office. Formal complaints about Brennan's command style, his treatment of subordinates, and his dangerous protocols. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found Lara reviewing mission briefings and handed her a cup of coffee with a grin that was pure satisfaction. "Thought you'd want to know," he said quietly. "Brennan's replacement arrived an hour ago. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez from the 23rd Fighter Wing. Word is, she's got combat experience and actually knows how close air support is supposed to work." Lavra nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. A competent commander would mean pilots could focus on their jobs instead of navigating political minefields. There's more, Rodriguez continued. The EG investigation is expanding. Turns out, Brennan's been playing these games at his previous assignments too. There are 3 other pilots from different bases who've come forward with similar stories. The implications were staggering. Brennan hadn't just targeted Laura. He'd been systematically destroying careers and endangering troops throughout his command history. How did he get away with it for so long? Lavra asked. Same way bullies always. Get away with it, Rodriguez replied grimly. He picked targets who couldn't fight back and made sure there were no witnesses. But you changed that. You made people pay attention. The irony wasn't lost on Laura. By trying to destroy her so publicly, Brennan had exposed his own pattern of abuse to scrutiny it couldn't survive. Lieutenant Walsh approached with news that made the day even better. Laura, sorry, Major, you need to hear this. I just got off the radio with Lieutenant Ray's team. How are they doing? That's just it, Walsh grinned. They're back in the field, and guess what happened this morning? They called for close air support during a routine patrol, and response time was 4 minutes. 4 minutes from initial call to rounds on target. Lavra felt a surge of satisfaction. The old protocols were working again, which meant ground troops were getting the support they needed to stay alive. Gets better, Walsh continued. Ray specifically requested you for their next major operation. Says his team won't work with anyone else. The ultimate compliment from Special Operations, a personal request. It meant her reputation with the people who mattered most, the troops on the ground, was not just intact but enhanced. But the morning's best moment came when Lieutenant Colonel Martinez found Laura in the briefing room, studying mission reports. Major Daniels, Martinez said, extending her hand. I've heard a lot about you. Laura tensed slightly, unsure what to expect from Brennan's replacement. Martinez smiled. All good things. I've read your mission reports, and I've talked to some of the ground commanders you've supported. I wanted you to know that under my command, pilots will be judged by one criterion: how well they support the troops who depend on them. Yes, ma'am, Laura replied, feeling hope bloom in her chest. I've also reviewed those protocols that caused so much trouble, Martinez continued. They've been officially rescinded. We're going back to doctrine that actually makes sense, pilot. Initiative, rapid response, and trust in the judgment of experienced combat aviators. Laura nodded, hardly daring to believe how completely the situation had reversed. There's one more thing, Martinez said. I understand you're transferring to Nellis, soon to work on new training curriculum. I want you to know that any pilot who graduates from that program and gets assigned to my squadron will be coming to a command that values what you're teaching. It was more than vindication. It was validation that the principles Laura had fought for would continue long after she left Afghanistan. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. General Crawford himself arrived at the hangar, not for an official inspection, but for what he called a fact-finding mission. Lavra found herself walking him through her pre-flight procedures, explaining how she prepared for close air support missions. Crawford listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that showed he understood both the flying and the fighting sides of the equation. Major, he said finally, I want you to understand something. What happened here wasn't just about one bad commander or one good pilot. It was about the soul of military aviation. Laura waited for him to continue. We can have the best aircraft in the world, the most advanced weapons, the most sophisticated technology, Crawford said. But none of that matters if we forget that. Our job is to support the young men and women who close with and destroy the enemy. He reminded us of that. He paused, looking at her at 10 with what seemed like genuine affection. The Pentagon is watching what we do here, the way we handled This situation is going to influence policy for years to come. You should be proud of that." As Crawford left, Laura reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. Brennan's attempt to destroy her had backfired spectacularly, exposing him to the kind of scrutiny that ended careers. More importantly, it had sparked a broader conversation about the proper relationship between air power and ground forces. The evening brought one final piece of satisfaction. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found her in the hangar, where she was doing a final check on her aircraft before the next day's missions. "Major, thought you'd want to know. Word just came down about Brennan." Laura looked up from her inspection checklist. "What kind of word?" Rodriguez's grin was pure justice. "He's been relieved of command and reassigned to a desk job at Peterson Air Force Base. No troops, no aircraft, no operational responsibilities. He'll spend the rest of his career pushing paper in Colorado." Laura nodded, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and pity. Brennan had brought his downfall on himself, but seeing any officer's career end wasn't something to celebrate. "There's more," Rodriguez continued. "The other pilots he targeted at previous assignments. They're all being reviewed for possible promotion and reassignment to better positions. Turns out, when you expose one bad commander, it opens doors for a lot of good people who were being held back." As Laura finished her inspection and headed back to her quarters, she thought about the ripple effects of the past week's events. By standing up for what was right, she'd not only saved her own career, but potentially saved the careers of other pilots and the lives of countless ground troops who would benefit from better close air support. The war in Afghanistan would continue, with all its complexities and challenges. But thanks to the courage of everyone who had stood with her against injustice, it would be fought a little more effectively, with a little more respect for the lives of the men and women who did the actual fighting. Sometimes, Laura realized the most important victories weren't won in the sky over enemy territory. Sometimes they were won in briefing rooms and hearing chambers, where the courage to stand up for principle could change everything. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that American air power existed, to serve American ground forces. And Laura would be ready for all of it. 3 weeks later, Laura stood on the tarmac at Bagram Air Base, watching the sunrise paint the Hindu Kush Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Today was her last day in Afghanistan, her final mission before transferring to Nellis Air Force Base to begin her new assignment, reshaping close air support training for the entire Air Force. Her A-10 sat ready on the flight line, armed and fueled, for one last mission. The shark mouth painted on its nose seemed to grin with anticipation, as if the aircraft itself knew this was a special day. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached, carrying her flight helmet and wearing an expression that mixed pride with sadness. Over the past months, he'd become more than her crew chief. He'd become a friend and ally in the fight for better close air support. "All ready, Major," he said, handing her the helmet. Weapons checked, fuel topped off, and the birds purring. Like a kitten, she knows she's flying with the best. Laura accepted the helmet, feeling its familiar weight. "Jake, I can't tell you how much I'm going to miss working with you." "The feeling's mutual, ma'am," Rodriguez replied. "But Nellis is lucky to get you. Those young pilots you'll be training don't know how good they're going to have it." The mission, brief, had been straightforward. Provide close air support for a joint Army-Marine operation in the mountains near the Pakistani border. Intelligence indicated moderate enemy resistance, and the ground commanders had specifically requested Laura for what they called insurance. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez appeared as Laura finished suiting up. In the 3 weeks since taking command, Martinez had proven to be everything Brennan wasn't competent: supportive and absolutely focused on mission effectiveness. "Major, ready for your victory lap?" Martinez asked with a smile. "Just another mission, ma'am," Laura replied, but she couldn't hide her own smile. "Not to the people on the ground," Martinez said seriously. "Word came down from the ground commander this morning. Captain Rodriguez, Army Infantry specifically asked for you. Says his men sleep better knowing Iron Hawk is overhead." As Lavra climbed into her cockpit for the last time at Bagram, she reflected on how much had changed since her confrontation with Brennan. The new protocols were working exactly as intended. Response times were down. Mission effectiveness was up, and ground commanders were praising the improved support they were receiving. More importantly, the culture had changed. Pilots felt empowered to exercise judgment in support of ground troops, and commanders understood that micromanaging combat operations from rear headquarters was both ineffective and dangerous. "Iron Hawk Tower," came the familiar voice of the air traffic controller. "Cleared for takeoff." "Give him hell out there." Lavra smiled as she pushed the throttles forward. "Copy, Tower. One last time." The A-10 rolled down the runway and lifted into the clear Afghan sky, carrying with it the hopes and prayers of every ground soldier who depended on close air support to bring them home alive. The flight to the target area took 40 minutes, giving Laura time to think about her journey from a young pilot trying to make a difference to a major whose name would be attached to Air Force doctrine for years to come. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when she'd wondered if the fight was worth the cost. But as she checked in with the ground commander and heard the relief in his voice when he confirmed Iron Hawk was on station, she knew every moment of struggle had been worthwhile. "Iron Hawk, this is Roughneck 6. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset. "Good to have you overhead. We're moving to secure Hill 274. Intelligence says it's lightly defended, but we've learned not to trust intelligence." "Copy." "Roughneck 6, Lavra replied. "I've got eyes on your movement. Looks clear from up here, but I'll stay close just in case." For the first 2 hours, the mission proceeded exactly as planned. The Army Marine Force moved methodically up the hillside, encountering only light resistance that they handled with their organic weapons. Lavra circled overhead, her targeting pod scanning for threats, but finding nothing that required her intervention. Then everything changed. "Iron Hawk, Roughneck 6. Rodriguez's voice exploded through the radio, tense with controlled panic. "We've got a problem up here. Massive IED just took out our lead element. Multiple casualties, and we're taking fire from concealed positions. We need immediate air support." Laura's training kicked in immediately. Her targeting pod swiveled toward the coordinates Rodriguez was calling out, painting enemy positions that had been invisible moments before. The attack was well coordinated and obviously pre-planned. The enemy had been waiting for the Americans to advance into their kill zone. "Roughneck 6, I have eyes on multiple muzzle flashes," Lavra called back. "Marking targets now. Keep your heads down." Through her targeting display, Lavra could see the tactical situation developing. The lead element was pinned down in an exposed position, taking fire from at least 3 different directions. Casualties were mounting, and without immediate intervention, the entire operation would collapse into a disaster. Lara armed her GAU-8 cannon and rolled into her attack run. The familiar whine of the 7-barrel Avenger spinning up was like music to her ears, the sound of American air power coming to the aid of American ground forces. "Guns, guns, guns," she called, squeezing the trigger. The cannon's roar echoed through the mountains as 30mm rounds tore into enemy positions. Clouds of dust and debris erupted from the hillside, and the volume of enemy fire immediately decreased. "Roughneck 6, how copy?" Lavra called as she banked for another pass. "Iron Hawk, that was beautiful," Rodriguez replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "You got 2 of the positions. We're moving the wounded to cover now." But Laura's targeting pod was painting new threats, reinforcements moving up from the reverse slope of the hill, carrying what looked like heavy weapons. "Roughneck 6, you've got company coming from the north. Looks like mortar or recoilless rifles. I'm rolling in on them now." Lara switched to rockets, lining up her approach on the enemy reinforcements. The IGM-65 Mavericks streaked downrange, detonating in twin blooms of fire and smoke that silenced the heavy weapons before they could be brought into action. For the next 30 minutes, Lara worked the battlefield like a surgeon, using precision strikes to eliminate threats while carefully avoiding any position that might endanger friendly forces. Every pass was calculated, every shot deliberate, every decision balanced between effectiveness and safety. By the time the last enemy position was silenced, Lara's ammunition was nearly exhausted, but the ground force was secure and moving to evacuate their wounded. "Iron Hawk, Roughneck 6, Rodriguez called. "I don't know how to thank you. You just saved a lot of American lives up here." "Just doing my job, Roughneck 6, Lara replied, but she felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from a mission well done. As she turned for home, Lara realized this final mission had been the perfect capstone to her deployment. Everything she'd fought for, pilot initiative, rapid response, trust in combat experience, had come together to save American lives when it mattered most. The landing at Bagram was bittersweet. As Lara shut down her engines for the last time, she felt a profound sense of completion. She'd come to Afghanistan as a young captain, eager to make a difference. She was leaving as a major, whose actions had changed how the entire Air Force thought about close air support. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting as she climbed out of the cockpit, his weathered face beaming with pride. "How'd it go, Major?" "Textbook," Lara replied. "The new protocols worked exactly like they were supposed to. Ground troops got the support they needed when they needed it." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. This wasn't just about one successful mission. It was validation of everything they'd fought to achieve. As Lara walked away from her A-10 for the last time, she turned back for one final look. The aircraft sat silent on the ramp, its job done, its mission complete. Tomorrow it would fly with another pilot, protecting other ground troops, carrying on the tradition of close air support that Lara had helped to preserve and improve. But tonight, she could rest easy knowing that somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, American soldiers were alive because she'd had the courage to stand up for what was right. The war would continue, but it would be fought a little better because one pilot had refused to let politics and personal ambition override the fundamental duty to support those who served on the ground. 6 months later, Major Lara Daniels stood before a classroom of young pilots at Nellis Air Force Base, each one eager to learn the art and science of close air support. The setting was different: modern classrooms instead of dusty hangars, training ranges instead of active combat zones, but the mission remained the same: preparing aviators to support ground forces when lives hung in the balance. "Close air support," Lara began, clicking to her first slide, "is not about the aircraft. It's not about the weapons. It's about the sacred trust between those who fight on the ground and those who provide support from the sky." In the front row, Second Lieutenant Mark Stevens raised his hand. "Ma'am, what if ground controllers request strikes that seem tactically unsound?" Lara smiled, remembering asking similar questions as a young pilot. "Lieutenant, that's exactly the right question to ask. Close air support requires judgment, experience, and most importantly, trust. If a ground commander is calling for help, your job is to find a way to give it to him safely and effectively." She clicked to the next slide, showing radio transcripts from her final mission in Afghanistan. This is from a real engagement 6 months ago. Notice how the ground commander describes his situation, how air support responds, and how they work together to solve the tactical problem. As her students studied the transcripts, Lara reflected on how far things had come since her confrontation. with Colonel Brennan. The Daniels Protocol was now standard doctrine throughout the Air Force, emphasizing pilot initiative, rapid response, and trust in the judgment of experienced combat aviators. More importantly, the cultural change had spread beyond just close air support. Young officers throughout the Air Force were being encouraged to speak up when they saw problems, to trust their professional judgment, and to remember that their ultimate loyalty was to the mission and the troops who depended on them. After class, Lavra found a message waiting in her office. Lieutenant Riaz, now promoted to lieutenant commander, had sent an update from his current deployment in Syria. His SEAL team was working with local forces against ISIS, and they'd specifically requested close air support from pilots trained in the new protocols. Major, his message read, wanted you to know that the pilot supporting our last operation was one of you graduates from Nellis. Kid was outstanding aggressive when he needed to be, careful when the situation required it, and absolutely focused on keeping us alive. You'd be proud of him. We sure were. Lavra felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what success really looked like, not personal glory or career advancement, but young pilots carrying forward the lessons she'd learned through trial and error. Blood and sacrifice. Her reflection was interrupted by a knock on her office door. Come in, she called. Master Sergeant Rodriguez entered, now assigned to Nellis as the senior NCO for the Close Air Support Training Squadron. His transfer had been arranged by General Crawford, who understood that the best training programs needed experienced enlisted personnel who understood the realities of combat. Major, thought you'd want to see this, Rodriguez said, handing her a newspaper clipping. The headline read, Former Squadron Commander Resigns from Air Force. Below, it was a brief article about Colonel Brennan's early retirement, describing it as voluntary, but noting that he'd been reassigned to administrative duties after performance issues at his previous command. Lavra scanned the article, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Brennan's career was over, which was probably for the best given his treatment of subordinates and disregard for ground force safety. But she took no personal satisfaction in his downfall. It was simply the inevitable result of his own choices. Any word on the other pilots he targeted? She asked. Rodriguez grinned. All doing well. Captain Williams got promoted to major and is commanding a squadron in Germany. Captain Thompson is at the Pentagon working on new air-ground coordination doctrine. And Captain Jackson just graduated from the Navy's Top Gun program, apparently. Her experiences with Brennan made her determined to be the best pilot she could possibly be. It was fitting justice. Brennan's attempts to destroy careers had instead motivated his victims to excel beyond what they might have achieved otherwise. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. Got a call from Lieutenant Colonel Martinez this morning. She wanted you to know that close air support response times in her sector are now averaging 3.2 minutes, and ground commander satisfaction ratings are at an all-time high. Laura nodded, pleased but not surprised. Good leadership and sound doctrine had predictable results, better performance, and higher morale. Oh, and Major, Rodriguez added with a sly smile. She also mentioned that they're naming the new close air support facility at Bagram after you. The Hawk Center for Air-Ground Operations. Lavra felt her throat tighten with emotion. Having her call sign attached to a training facility meant that future generations of pilots would learn her story, understand the principles she'd fought for, and carry forward the tradition of putting ground force support above personal safety or career considerations. That evening, Lavra drove out to the flight line to watch the sunset paint the Nevada mountains in shades of gold and purple. A flight of A-10s was returning from a training mission, their distinctive silhouettes dark against the colorful sky. As she watched them land, Lavra thought about the young pilots she was training and the ground troops they would someday support. Somewhere in the world, American soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen were preparing for missions that would put them in harm's way. When they called for help, pilots trained in Laura's program would be ready to answer. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Major Daniels, this is Captain Sarah Kim, Class 25 Alpha from your CAS program, currently deployed to Iraq. Wanted you to know I successfully supported 3 ground operations this week using techniques you taught us. 0 friendly casualties, mission objectives achieved. Thank you for teaching us to put the troops first. Respectfully, Captain Kim. Laura smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from knowing her work was making a real difference in the lives of people she'd never meet. This was what legacy really meant, not personal recognition or career advancement, but the knowledge that principles and values would continue long after she was gone. As the last attendant taxied to the ramp, Laura whispered a quiet promise to the desert wind. Keep them safe. Keep them all safe. Somewhere in the growing darkness, she could swear she heard the distant growl of turbofan engines and the unmistakable sound of the GAU-8 Avenger preparing to defend American ground forces. It was probably just her imagination, but it sounded like home. The legacy of Iron Hawk would endure as long as there were pilots willing to risk everything for the troops on the ground, and ground troops who knew that when they called for help, someone would always answer. In the end, that was the only thing that really mattered. The sacred trust between those who fight on the ground and those who watch over them from the sky. Laura had fought to preserve that trust, and now it was in good hands with the next generation of aviators. Her war was over. Their war was just beginning. And thanks to the lessons learned through conflict and sacrifice, they would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The roar of freedom would continue to echo through the mountains and valleys where American forces served, carried on the wings of pilots who understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Author's note: this story is dedicated to all the men and women who serve in combat, both in the air and on the ground, and to the unbreakable bond of trust that exists between them. The courage to stand up for what's right, even at personal cost, is what makes heroes, not the medals or recognition, but the willingness to put principle above politics and lives above career advancement. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.